Now that we have buttons doing something, let's talk about how we interact with the rest of our form. So in our form here, we have first name and last name. Obviously, we want the user to type them in for a reason. So we want to type them in so we can get that data. So how do we get that data? Well, we go back to our button handler. And at the time of the button being pressed, we're going to presume the user has filled in that form for the moment. They may or may not have. We can learn about validation as we go. We'll get more advanced as we learn more C++ constructs to help us do that. But what we can do right now is we can create a variable. And it's a string that they're going to type in. Everything a user types into a screen ends up being a string because it's keyboard entry. It's going to be the text they do. Even when they type in numbers, they're the characters of the numbers that they're going to do, and we have to first grab them as a string. So we're going to get their first name is going to be the first thing we're going to grab. Now, how do I grab their first name? Well, I have to go to that text box. And so the text box over here is this one that gets created. Now, what's the name of this text box? Remember, if I want to go and ask for something, I have to ask it for it by name. If I want to ask, if you want to ask me as your instructor, you'd say Tony, and ask a question. You wouldn't go ask randomly another person because they're not the one who knows about your C++ class. And you might ask somebody who knows C++, but not it wouldn't be answered about this class specifically. But you also don't want to just say it up in the air. Hey, somebody answer my C++ question. We need to ask a specific person. So I have to figure out the name of this box. And I can do that in the properties. It's somewhere. Oh, look up at the top, actually. Text box 1 is a text box name. Right here, so you see it's text box 1. And it's all the different boxes are inside of here. You can see I have a button 1, form 1, label 2, text box 1, text box 2. So I can use that, and I'm going to use that for the moment. Come back to my code. And I start typing text box. You can see text box 1 shows up. And I can, from the text box 1, I can get the attribute, and I hit dot. You can see the first thing it's going to suggest is text inside of here, because that gets or sets the text associated with this control. And so my first name, excuse me, is textbox1.text. And so now I could test this out. You pressed a button by appending, using the plus sign, the first name to my to my output message. So let's save this. Let's test out this tiny little bit. We put one line of code in and modified the second line of code. Let's test this out. We're coding small. We're going to do it very simply. So I run my application. Now, if I put in my name is Tony, and I say save, you pressed a button, Tony. Okay, I can now change this to be my name is Bertha, and I can say you pressed a button, Bertha. All right, so whatever I type inside of there gets stored inside of this text box 1, and then I can access that through the text field. Now, the field itself is not just the text I put inside of there. I know that's all we care about that. But the field itself has all the properties we saw before. When we came over here, we looked at the properties of this. It holds whether or not it's a different color, what the size of the font is, whether there's text stored inside of there. There's one thing there's the text inside of there, which it starts off with nothing. It stores all these properties. So it's more than just simply the text that I put inside of there. There's so much more that we care about that. So I'm going to double click on save, takes us back over here. I can put the same thing out here. String last is equal now to text box 2. I'm using my code complete. I push down here to select text box 2 dot text. And I can append this on just to show this functionality. I'm going to put a space in between there, because if I don't, it'd say first name, last name with no space. I have to format it. I have to tell it exactly what to do. First and last in between. All right, so now I can run my code. If I hit save without typing in anything, it just says you pressed a button, just like it did before. It's not that the code's broken. It's just that I have not, as a user, provided values inside of here. If I put in space for first name, and I put in D for last name, watch what happens. You pressed a button, a whole bunch of spaces, and D. So it took all the spaces I put into first name and it flooded that in, as opposed to now if I do Tony and Low and I hit save, it puts in Tony Low. So this is the foundation of most applications. I grab inputs and then I use them in some interesting way. How I use them is going to be up to later on. If I want to check to make sure the user actually typed in something, I'm going to learn about all sorts of things later on. I can check the length of the text that was typed in. Say, did you type in more than 0 characters? But then to do that, I have to do a comparison operator, which we'll learn about. I have to do a decision, an if statement to see if you typed in more than these characters. I might even have to do loops and other aspects we'll learn more about later on. Right now, all we're really worried about is getting the application up and running and using variables. Now, one thing I want to point out to the variable is text box 1 is a very confusing thing. I have to remember now, text box 1 is associated with first name. Text box 2 is associated with last name. And so what I want you right now is just code this, but then we're going to come back one more time and then make one more little tweak on this to make sure our style is up to form. Right now we have a functional application, but we also want to consider style, which we'll talk about next.